Just a really warm welcome to everyone here. It's really lovely to have you here. It's the end of 2021. We're coming to the end. It's a really busy time, especially for those in the Northern Hemisphere. There's not much light at the moment, so we really appreciate you being here. We know it can get quite tiring at this end of the year, but for those of you below the Northern Hemisphere, I hope you're having a wonderful time in all the sunshine, and grateful also that you're here with us. This is a smaller, more intimate gathering, which will be really, really wonderful for having a proper conversation. And really, just want to say a few things before, a little bit before I hand over to others who can share their wisdom. So just to really welcome you either back if you're here, maybe you've been to all 4 of these consultation sessions on freedom of religion or belief and the SDGs. Maybe you're here for the first time, and in either case, a really warm welcome to you. This gathering is a really important conversation around freedom of religion or belief, or FORB, civic space and expression, and that's in the context of SDGs, rather the goal to create inclusive and peaceful societies and institutions. And that's the context we are working in today, and we also very much bear in mind the overall SDG pledge to leave no one behind. So how do we get there? Before we begin, it would be wonderful to hear from you in the chat if you feel like it. No obligation, but I know we're a very global gathering, so it'd be lovely to hear where you're from. Tomorrow is International Human Rights Day. We're coming out of the Second World War 72 years ago. Tomorrow, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was announced, and there is no better time to have space to explore how human rights empower us to have to seek space and to have space to express who we most authentically are and to be who we most authentically are, inspired by all parts of our identity, including our religion or beliefs, and for that also to be listened to. As Marie-Yor will expand on in a little bit, freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression are inherently connected. They are not in contradiction with one another, as some might think or believe. To manifest your religion or belief is to express it. Without freedom of expression, there is no freedom of religion or belief. And we can take guidance from international law on the limits needed for these rights, so that there's maximum space for all of us to simultaneously be able to practice our rights. And these limits are where it incites with a real risk to harm others. And I'm sure those more familiar with freedom of expression could expand a little bit on that. I question, in any case, personally, whether inciting harm is really an expression of who we most authentically are, or what God or the universe, whatever we believe, is calling us to do. And I also question whether controlling expression and limiting and restricting it, especially that which doesn't advocate for harm, is rather us seeking to control our environment, shut down the expression that makes us feel insecure. And relating this to freedom of religion or belief, this might be seeing where we might be worried about others being seen to have a spark of the divine or truth within them, and then what does this mean for us? So this seeking of control is what kind of seems to have been enshrined in some laws and policies that undermine space publicly to express oneself within society. And these are, as always very frequently raised when talking about the intersection of expression and FORB, are of course blasphemy and apostasy laws, where there's punishment and even the death penalty for expressing certain or new beliefs. And I'm not just talking about the context of Pakistan and South Asia. 9 African countries have apostasy laws, 25 criminalize blasphemy, 23 EU member states also have laws penalizing blasphemy. And where there is fear to express beliefs in public, self-censorship can become normalized. And this seems to contradict the vision that SDG 16 sets out, to have inclusive, peaceful societies and institutions which are also accountable. So with these dynamics, at the very least, we lose the rich benefits of hearing from alternative approaches, perspectives on collective issues, and just ways of being in the world that can help societies to thrive even better. Particularly, we lose We lose the voice of women and youth, who often have the least voice in society, despite being a really large part of the population. So at this point in 2021 and moving into 2022, instead of blame and accusation, it's perhaps important for us to step back and start to listen why the status quo is why it is. Why is it so important to those who feel the need to restrict expression and beliefs? What is it that's feared? And some of these laws that I've mentioned, for example, specifically were brought in by rulers in colonial times. So we can question their place now, how they still serve us, do they serve us, still fulfilling, and how can we potentially meet these needs without restricting the expression of others' identities. One way forward might be how to focus on building skills, especially for women and young people, to find their most authentic voices. I realize that's quite a Western way of expressing it, but inspired by their beliefs, so that they feel secure to express who they are. And then perhaps as they feel more secure, as people feel more secure in society, they can then feel more secure to allow space for others to express their beliefs. So what would the society that SDG 16 envisages look like if that was possible? Each one of us has a responsibility to support in building this space, and it does start with ourselves. And I know Hina will talk a bit more about this a bit later. So just before I hand over to our speakers, I just ask you here in the room to reflect now. What are you hoping to learn and take away today? Remember, we are all experts of our own contexts and experiences. We all bring unique insights, and we are here to learn from each other today in the areas where our experience or knowledge doesn't extend. This is a space for all of us, and our conversation has been especially set up for parliamentarians and religious or belief leaders and influencers to better be empowered to move work on these issues from theory into and conversation into practice, both now and through the follow-up work with the regional secretariats. So these conversations will feed into IPP FORB, the International Panel of Parliamentarians on FORB, and others international gatherings in 2022 and the following year. And we also hope potentially the UN high-level dialogue on SDGs in 2022 as well. And I know we will almost certainly have at least one special rapporteur, at least on FORB, joining us today, and hopefully the staff of the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression too. So I know they will be listening, or at least we'll be able to ensure they have what we talk about today. So parliamentarians and religious belief leaders are really important for this work. They are in positions to influence cultural and moral narratives and behaviours, and are able to bring forward stories and experiences from those whose voices have been overlooked. Please note our advocacy statement. This was launched at the Act for SDGs week in September. It should appear magically, hopefully, in the chat now. It's an important personal recognition, and we really hope that you can sign in your own capacity, just recognising the importance to seek and listen to religious or belief communities' experiences and needs. This is all part of the pledge to help the SDGs to leave no one behind. So we'd love if you could add your name to that. And before then, we move to conversation in breakout rooms. We are joined, as I've said, by some of those thinking through and working on FORB expression and civic space issues. Please listen to what they share, look at what resonates for you, and do bring this to the breakout sessions that we'll have just afterwards. Please also ask any questions in the chat. We will pick up on these. No question is stupid, or all questions are really welcome and help us learn. So I'm delighted to immediately pass over to Marie Juhl Pedersen, who is senior researcher at the Danish Institute for Human Rights and has published a really excellent report on the intersections of expression and FORB, and will be able to kind of help us understand what the framework for what we need to think about today is. Marie.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation now?
Yes, yeah, got that. Thank you. It might need to be enlarged.
Yes. Okay, so thanks a lot for all these very, very insightful words. I feel like there's really not much for me to add. I think you really, really beautifully described some of the dilemmas and issues that are when we talk about freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression. So let me try to just repeat some of the things that you have said. So as you rightfully said, freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief are very often seen to be in stark opposition to one another. And there are obviously countless examples from all over the world where people express themselves in ways that are challenging or shocking, offending, or outright hateful of other people's deeply held beliefs and convictions. And for some, this is proof that we must restrict freedom of expression if we want to protect freedom of religion or belief. But from a human rights perspective, such restrictions are often deeply problematic. Restrictions on free speech may very well protect some people against offensive expressions, but they often end up violating other people's legitimate right to express their thoughts, opinions, and convictions. And as such, they harm not only free speech, but also the right to freedom of religion or belief. So if we want to protect freedom of religion, we have to protect freedom of expression, and the other way around. Importantly, that doesn't mean that freedom of expression can never be limited. There are a number of situations in which freedom of expression can legitimately be restricted according to international human rights law. Most importantly, advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence can and should be prohibited. And that obviously includes expressions of incitement directed at particular religious or belief communities, as well as incitement originating from religious or belief communities. The Rabat Plan of Action provides useful guidance in determining when something can be considered incitement and should be prohibited. And you can see some of the key questions that should be asked in relation to this on the screen. So there are legitimate limitations to freedom of expression, but around the world, the vast majority of limitations are not of the legitimate kind. And let's take a look at some of the most serious challenges to freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief. As Catherine said, laws against blasphemy, defamation, or apostasy are among the most serious challenges. More than 70 countries in the world have laws that prohibit blasphemy, defamation, or apostasy on the grounds that such expressions may hurt religious feelings, upset religious harmony, or otherwise constitute a threat to religion and society. From a human rights perspective, such laws are deeply problematic and should be abolished. Considerations as to individual religious feelings or preservation of religious harmony are not legitimate reasons for limiting our fundamental freedoms. A ban on blasphemy might protect some people's beliefs, but it will inevitably restrict the beliefs of others. What one person considers to be offensive and hurtful may be a genuine conviction of another person. And that shows in the fact that religious or belief minorities, religious feminists, reformers, atheists, and others whose convictions or practices differ from those of the majority are very often among those who are accused of blasphemy. Laws against proselytism and conversion are another serious challenge. Some countries employ general restrictions on proselytizing and attempts to convert. They argue that such activities may disturb the religious harmony in a society, especially in contexts where competition between religious groups is hostile or where there is a history of religious violence. And according to international human rights law, proselytism can in fact be restricted in exceptional cases, most importantly when coercion and force is employed. But broad restrictions on proselytism and conversion as such, they are incompatible with human rights. They not only prevent some people from sharing information about their religion or belief, they also prevent others from receiving information about religion or belief and from making choices based on this information, including the choice to convert. So as such, general restrictions on proselytism will almost inevitably violate not only the right to freedom of expression, but also freedom of religion or belief. The last challenge that I want to mention is restrictions on hate speech related to religion or belief. Around the world, we have actually seen an increase in hate speech legislation, including also in Europe. And such laws can be an important tool in the protection against incitement to hatred and violence if they reflect international human rights standards and criminalize only a very narrow set of expressions. But unfortunately, that's not the case with much hate speech legislation. Hate speech laws are often vague and overly broad, targeting expressions that are, and I quote, for instance, likely to stir up hatred without the contextual assessment of the intent of the speaker or the risk of imminent violence, as is outlined in the Rabat Plan of Action. So even if such laws are well intended, their effects can be chilling, and in some cases, they can come dangerously close to blasphemy laws. So in order to protect not only freedom of expression, but also freedom of religion, legal restrictions on expressions should be reserved for a very narrow set of circumstances. Even what some people find deeply offensive and intolerant expressions should be legally allowed, as long as they do not amount to incitement to hatred, discrimination, or violence. Importantly, this does not mean that we should just accept religiously related intolerance and discrimination. We can respond to prejudice, stigmatization, and discrimination by other means than the law, by using our right to free speech to challenge hate speech. And as societal authorities, opinion makers, and agents of change, parliamentarians and religious leaders have an important role to play in this. In our brief, we suggest some relevant lines of action, including advocacy for the abolishment of blasphemy laws, dialogue and collaborative action to dismantle harmful stereotypes and prejudices, human rights education and awareness raising, and so on. And these are all examples of the positive role that the exercise of freedom of expression can play in combating intolerance and discrimination. But perhaps most important is the imperative to speak out against hate speech. As religious leaders and parliamentarians, your voices are heard. Use that voice. Refrain from using expressions which may incite violence, hostility, or discrimination yourself. And importantly, speak out against other people's hate speech and denounce it publicly. Challenge the underlying justifications of hatred, refute claims of representation and popular support, and offer persuasive counter-narratives. So in short, meet bad speech with good speech. An open and inclusive public debate of ideas, opinions, and convictions can be an effective tool against intolerance and discrimination. In fact, often more so than restrictions and criminalization of expressions. So let me end with this quote from the Faith for Rights Declaration, which some of you may know. It's a declaration that was written by a group of faith-based actors in support of human rights. And they say, speech is fundamental to individual and communal flourishing. It constitutes one of the most crucial mediums for good and evil sides of humanity. War starts in the minds and is cultivated by a reasoning fueled by often hidden advocacy of hatred. Positive speech is also the healing tool of reconciliation and peace building in the hearts and minds. So with this, I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. That's really helpful. And we know it's really challenging to do this, and not only to stand up and speak. So it's important for us to know what support would be needed for that, but also to ensure human rights are not a kind of distant international Western endeavor. So it's kind of the localization of that and what language to help build this is really important for us to explore as well. I'm hoping Hina might be able to shed some wisdom on that and many other questions. So really excited to invite Hina Jilani now, who is a very well-known lawyer, human rights defender, member of the Elders since 2013, I believe, and also member of the high-level panel of experts on media freedom and former UN Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. So much wisdom for us to learn from, and really delighted to hand over to you, Hina.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And thank you for organizing this forum at a time when the issues that you raise and their connection to any growth or any progress in achieving the SDGs is very apparent. And it's very important for us not just to recognize that these connections exist, but also to find ways whereby we can construct feasible, practical, and doable pathways towards achieving these goals. I will speak today not just as a lawyer, but also as someone who is living in a society and a state where the deviations from the standards of international law, which lay down the foundations for religious tolerance, the freedom to profess, propagate religion, and mostly, foremost, the most important thing is they lay down the foundations for an open society where you are able to say and profess your beliefs, whether they are political or religious, in a manner in which there is no fear and there is no attempt by anyone else to clamp down on that freedom. I just want to say a few things here, which I think are really more come from my own experience. And let us not forget that I am not talking about one country when I talk about my experience, but about a whole region where tendencies are on the increase, which make it more and more difficult for us as civil society activists to have an influence on both social mindsets as well as the policies of states, which are taking us more and more towards religious intolerance and a continuing state of insecurity, especially for people who belong to either minority religions or minority sects in a particular country. The problem that I see right now with respect to the connection between freedom of religion and freedom of expression is not just that there are limitations that are placed which are much beyond what the international law allows, but the limitations that have been placed are really inherent in the laws that have created an environment of intolerance itself. And I think in the presence of a lack of recognition, it is very difficult for me to see how the international community is going to be able to achieve a global environment in which we have been able to show everyone that this is a situation where we are creating a world with more diversity, more inclusiveness. In fact, without targeting those legislative frameworks, which in themselves have created an environment of fear, an environment restrictions for people to profess their religion or even any kind of belief, is becoming extremely difficult and a big impediment towards civil society advocacy for a tolerant, more inclusive societies where SDG 16 goals can be in any way achieved. I also want to point out that when we talk about freedom of religion and freedom of expression, we have to see how the restrictions have given us illustrations of where the society then suffers harm and how these societies become totally unable not just to appreciate and celebrate diversity, but also to tolerate any kind of diversity. In many countries of South Asia, which is the region I'm more familiar with, we see that very pluralistic, diverse societies are moving towards a more kind of imposed homogeneity because of the insistence of the state or certain influential groups that receive the support of the state towards creating a single narrative to which everyone must adhere. And I think that's the reason why we see those narratives being transformed into laws by parliaments who have less inclination towards an open society and less commitment towards inclusiveness. And I see in the legal frameworks of relevant on issues relevant to the one that we are discussing, a tendency more to exclude, and in fact to, in many ways, give a tool in the hands of the majority to weaponize religion, not just to place restrictions on the ability to profess your religion and your belief, and not just on the ability to speak out, but also in the ability of the civil society to advocate the importance of free speech in order that these tendencies can be confronted. So where the tendencies are on the increase, the ability of the civil society to counter these narratives is also now being restricted, because the space now for civil society in general is being narrowed down. Where the state has failed to ensure the freedom of people, not just for religion or belief, but also the freedom of expression, they have also failed to protect the civil society actors or human rights defenders against attacks by those religious groups or those armed forces that have taken the initiative now to promote an environment and a climate whereby the majority now makes it difficult for minorities, whether they are religious communities or religious sects, to express their views against a narrative that is being deliberately built. I don't have to name countries, but I don't see any harm in naming them either. What we see happening in India, what we see happening in Pakistan, and to a great extent in Sri Lanka as well, is a sign that now not to deal with individual countries as an isolated issue of one country or one society, but have to make sure that we are working towards the better implementation of international standards in order to ensure that not only is there a common understanding of those standards globally, in our regions, and across borders. We have to work together in order to make sure that nobody is left behind. I will give you one example of a very recent incident that has happened in Pakistan. A Sri Lankan citizen was killed by a violent mob on the basis of, or allegations, that he had hurt the religious sentiments of the Muslim workers in the factory that he was managing. Now, whatever the facts may have been, it is an extremely frightening scenario when religion can be weaponized to justify mob violence in the minds of the youth or anyone who is inciting them. These kind of incidents have become very frequent. We have seen such incidents in India. We have seen such incidents in many places. And I'm not just kind of pointing towards this region. These are examples I'm giving because I belong to this region. But this is a global tendency that we have to work together in order that we are able to mitigate and eliminate attitudes that result in the harm to not just individuals, but to community relationships. If you look at the situation of conflicts today, you will see that war is not really between states. And peace is not just something that we are working towards in terms of ending war between states. Today, our basic problem and our basic efforts are going towards making communities and bringing peace to communities themselves, where disharmony on the basis of religion, on the basis that you are unable to get into a dialogue, you are unable to allow the youth to have a critical appreciation of the social and religious scenarios that are being created around them, and they're asked to follow them. Anything that is being said is now, in a very subjective way, turned into the hurting of the sentiments of a certain community or a certain religious sect or community of whether they are, in one part of the world or the other. The question now before us is not that what is happening. The question is, what is the way forward? How do we counter these narratives in a way in which the human rights defenders involved in this struggle are able to do so with freedom and without fear? And I think that's something that everyone has to discuss now and be able to bring out ideas on not just countering a narrative, but being able to motivate parliaments in order that they are able to inform themselves and others. Legislations are influencing mindsets towards a more negative form of thinking rather than countering what we saw as social attitudes that harmed women or minorities in the past. Unfortunately, parliaments are not doing the job they need to do. The responsibility is always shared, but the predominant responsibility to protect not just the freedoms of individuals, but to protect the environment in general, the political and the social environment, from harm through extremism of any kind, is that of the state and the institution that is foremost that comes to mind in terms of protecting democratic thinking, democratic values, and the rule of law is the parliament. And for as long as the parliament remains either not motivated or in any way looks towards some kind of an interest rather than their responsibility to join the forces and the voices that are being raised against this kind of spreading of and increasing of this kind of environment, I think majorly need to understand what their platforms and their responsibility of being representatives means. So these are some of the things that I think I needed to bring to you. Yeah, I'm sure that people have ideas that should now feed our thoughts and feed our movements in order to achieve what we think is necessary today to preserve civilization at the global level, but especially around us at local levels. When you speak about not leaving anyone behind, always keep in mind that even where there are public declarations that this kind of an environment will be something that the states are going to not tolerate, there are always people who are left behind. In my country, where there are steps being taken towards more and more security for minority communities, there are other minorities who have become extremely vulnerable because of impunity for violations against their rights. So I think I will end here and just remind people that those that are more vulnerable are the ones who are less popular. And their causes are always the ones that the state hesitates to take up. And the forces that harm them always enjoy from the impunity that states give them. One of the examples that I can give from Pakistan is the Ahmadiyya community here. Whereas there are voices raised when some atrocious incident like the one that I just described about the Sri Lankan citizen happens, there are voices that are raised. But Ahmadis are killed every day. Their places of worship are desecrated every day in Pakistan. And yet there are no voices. There is always silence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hina, for bringing to light and reminding us to look for those who we don't hear from, those who we don't often see, and also for reminding us, really importantly, of the importance of national efforts, but also international efforts. And I just wonder if there's those who work on conflict transformation theory and other kind of sectors where there's real wisdom to kind of help bring it into this human rights space as well, that could be part of how we look forward and work on country issues, but then also look at this, as you said, as a real trend, and understand it from that light too. And I know the next person I want to introduce is Faruq Faisel. Before we go into breakout rooms, he is wonderfully the regional director of South Asia for Article 19, which specializes in freedom of expression. Faruq has a really long history on working on these issues also, including across 13 countries, especially across South Asia. Just will immediately hand over to you, Faruq. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you, the organizer, for giving me the opportunity to speak in this important discussions. And it's a really honor to be on the same panel with respected Hina Jilani. I had the opportunity to meet her a few times in Canada when I was working for an organization called South Asia Partnership Canada, which was working in South Asia. So I really appreciate what she was speaking today. So what I will say in next 5, 7, 8 minutes is, in general, my comment about the blurb and my other concerns as director or working with Article 19, and also focusing on South Asia. Then I will come to Bangladesh, the current situation in Bangladesh, because I'm based in Bangladesh now. So I strongly believe that freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief are interlinked. However, my point is that unless and until the safety and security of the speaker could be ensured, then neither the freedom of expression nor the people who will speak for promoting their religion would be able to speak out, because there are hate speech and there are violences. So this is my, in general, my comment on that. But if I look at South Asia, is that it was Indian subcontinent at the beginning. And it started with Hinduism, then Buddhism, then Islam came from outside, and then Christianity also came from British period. And the British did a divide and rule policy, undertook a divide and rule policy in Indian subcontinent or South Asia. Most of the countries were ruled by the British at that time. But when India was divided in 1947, it was divided on basic of religion. The one side of the country, which is India today, will be Hindu dominated, and another side, Pakistan and Bangladesh, will be Islam dominated. Then in 1971, when Bangladesh had its war of liberation, freedom fight, the fight was not about religion. Like religion could be the same, but culture could be the different. So Bangladesh was created based on language and culture. So that's a way forward, perhaps, that we came out of the religion thing. But Bangladesh is walking towards backwards. It's like in 71, when it said that we are not Muslims only, we are also Bengali, and Bengali nationalism is constituted with all religious people, or all people from all religious beliefs who are living in Bangladesh. It was for them. And that we are losing in Bangladesh very quickly now. Like it's a country of religion, of majority of the population that we have today has a state religion, and it starts with Bismillah. It's become an Islamic kind of constitution. So that is the problem, and I will go in details with that, but I will look at Afghanistan, for example. I have the opportunity of working in many of the South Asian countries, and Afghanistan is not fighting between other religions, it's fighting inside Islam, you know, Shia or Sunni, Hazara or Pashtun, etc., etc. But at some point, we have to remember that Afghanistan had Jews and Hindus as well. But now the Jews have left. The last Jew has left after the takeover of Taliban this time. And the Hindus are there, are few. There is a Gurdwara in Kabul, and few Hindus are there. And also there is a Hindu Community Association in Herat and other places. And one of the associations in the provinces are led by female leaders. So that's a good sign. But at the same time, there's shrinking situation. In Pakistan, I wanted to talk about blasphemy, but Hina Jilani has already mentioned that, so I will not go into that. But in Sri Lanka, for example, the first conflict was between Hindu and Buddhist, and now is the Buddhist and Muslims are fighting there. So that's very unfortunate. So, and in Nepal also, in Nepal, the conversion is illegal. So that also, from my point of view, it limits the right of people to choose their own religion. So that's there. So in 8 South Asian countries, I think I highlighted Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka as areas of problem. Now I would like to look into the Bangladesh situation. I'm working here for the last 3 years, and I'm originally from Bangladesh. And when I was growing up, the fundamentalism or this kind of religious fanaticism was not there during Pakistan period. And principle of war of liberation, as I mentioned, is being lost slowly, and the religious tolerance is also disappearing, especially among Muslims. Again, I say the Shia Sunni issue, Ahmadiyya issue, it's happening all the time. And then during last Durga Puja, the Hindu festival, there was attacks, communal attacks on Hindu areas where they were praying praying for their goddesses. And the freedom of expression and tolerance is one thing that's missing very quickly and disappearing very quickly in Bangladesh. So what is my point? My point is that unless and until we have both in the society, freedom of expression and freedom of religion, and they can stand side by side, then we cannot ensure the both freedoms. And this is very important in a society to have both freedoms. But there is one part of FORP at the end called freedom of religion or belief. The belief issue is different. In Bangladesh, atheists are not considered as believer. Agnostics are not considered as believer. And transgender people are accepted in our society slowly. But LGBTQ are not accepted at all. They're being killed in several cases. So these are the issues that we have to look into in depth more in coming days. And social media, the online media, is one hand giving the opportunity to people to speak out, but on the other hand, it's also hate speech and misinformation, etc. And the government is trying to control this through Digital Security Act, Social Media Act, and etc., etc. So that's the problem. And the last issue that I want to mention, that if the country does not have real democracy, no election system, and it become more and more authoritarian type of government, then it's very difficult to ensure liberty and freedom of all the believers of different religions. So that's a problem. And in Bangladesh, the civic space is shrinking in a very rapid way. And recently, when there was a Democratic Summit, it's happening now. President Biden has called it, and Bangladesh was not invited. The government was really upset, and they were questioning why Pakistan and Nepal from South Asia and India has been invited there. So that's the issue. Like, we do not like to look at ourselves why we are not invited, or the invitation is that important, that whether invited or not. If we work for democracy and people's right, then everything will be fine. Okay. So now the issue is that what can we do? In South Asia, I think civil society organizations should work more in collaboration for the freedom of religion and freedom of expression at the same time. So that is not happening. Once we had a SARC, South Asia Regional Cooperation, and that disappeared because of the conflict between India and Pakistan. But I think civil society, nobody can stop that. We should work more on regional issues and have more solidarity and create a regional solidarity in South Asia. The second question is that in Bangladesh also, the different civil society organizations work on different spheres. Some, like I have a friend here who is from Hindu, Buddhist, Christian Association of Bangladesh in this meeting. They are trying to create space for the minority communities. I think we are working on freedom of expression. There are other organizations who are working on sexual diversity. All these organizations should come together and work together, because we do not stand alone. My last point is that Bangladesh was a secular country. We did not grow up in a way that we are Islamic fundamentalists, but now today is fundamentalism is spreading its wings. I think we, the civil society organization or open thinkers or other international players, have the responsibility to promote Bangladesh or promote the idea of Bangladesh as a Muslim country where secularism is respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faruq, so much. Thanks also for reminding that we have to look at ourselves. And I realize that we've spoken a lot about South Asia. So the South Asia and Southeast Asia working group particularly have a head start for the conversation now. And hopefully can pick up where you've just left off. But hopefully it also resonates as well. Some of these dynamics resonate with those who are moving into the other working groups as well, including those from across Africa. So it is our turn to move to breakout rooms. I think we'll have about 25 minutes to speak, a bit shorter than usual. And I'm keen to leave a bit of space to hear Simona after that. And then we can stay around a bit later as well. I can say a bit extra to make sure we've heard from you any immediate thoughts as well in the plenary if we don't have a lot of time to ask questions. So these breakout rooms are really important, and please do speak and share your thoughts and your wisdom from your experience as well in your context. Please practice listening deeply to each other. It's a really good, really allow that to emerge.
Implementation of the international human standards in their own countries or regions, and some of the also options that they have proposed to as next steps to move forward on these issues. I went into the Asia working group, and I was fascinated to hear from one of the participants that while many times at state level there is not willingness to advance on the issue of FORB, at community level there is a lot of work that can be done. So another speaker said the opposite. So at state level there is willingness, but then it's a community level where there are very high level of intolerance. Another one mentioned the issue of intersectionality. In his country, you know, religions is intermingled with race, so it's not as straightforward as it may seem. And also there are very strong trends of politicization of religion by the state. So, and this brings into very strong trends of political manipulation also of freedom of religion and belief. In the working group for Africa, I was able to join when the moderator asked for some options to move forward, and I was struck by the proposal, positively struck by the need of pushing for secular states, because only when the state is secular, it can ensure for the respect of FORB for every group. And this doesn't mean that we need to reject religion, but that we have to ground the respect for diversity on international human rights standards that are embedded in a secular state. There was also a proposal of the need of working together, religious groups, including minorities and governments, to stress the importance of civic education. So this is something also that I retained. And then I was able to listen just a very short time in the working group on Europe, and I retained that there is the need of develop a stronger understanding of what freedom of religion and belief is. We are not, there are still a lot of discrepancies among people and also among states and groups about these fundamental rights. And also to expand on the meaning of tolerance, that of course can be a first step. In some contexts, tolerance it's already a lot. In others, it can be a first step towards a comprehensive respect for diversity. So on Europe, so I just would like to also add that my office, we are also very concerned about increasing trends of hate speech. Tomorrow we will have a webinar on the intersection of genocide and Holocaust denial and freedom of opinion and expression, because we have noticed that this is a really a very increasing and dangerous trend, especially in the Balkan region. And I wanted to mention it here because I saw that the issue of hate speech has been raised many times in this webinar, at the beginning also by the experts who framed the discussion, and how it intersects with freedom of opinion and expression, and also with FORB. Now, just a few points that I see as gaps in this conversation. Today, I think there was a lot of focus on the importance of implementing the laws, but also some of the distinguished speakers have stressed that this is not working. You know, unfortunately, in certain contexts, it's very complicated to work with governments who don't want to change their laws. We heard about blasphemy, we heard about laws on apostasy and so on conversions and proselytism. So what else is left? So while I was listening to the distinguished speakers, I was thinking that is a very dire scenario that we have in front of us. if we only focus on the use of international human standards to deal with this issue. So I think also at the United Nations, we know this very well, and the Rabat Plan of Action that was mentioned by Marie-Julie, I think, also says that laws are not enough. So we really have to stress more and more the importance of policies and alternative measures to try to advance on forward and its intersection with the civic space. And I was thinking that something that we really value in the United Nations, and I hope that this is something also that could help bring the discussion forward today, is the role of education. This is something that's very close to the heart of the Secretary General, and that's why he recently called for an interministerial conference on the role of education to combat hate speech. And I will be happy to share with you the results of that interministerial conference. It's public because it includes a lot of ideas for governments, and I know that we have many parliamentarians here, so I really hope that it could be useful as a document to also advance the discussion on the use of non-legal measures to advance for the respect of FORB and the intersection with the civil space. Another thing that I didn't hear a lot is about the role of youth, and then of course this is and women also. This is something that it came up, but very tangentially. And I think when it comes, when it's about advancing on certain issues, also using education, we cannot but stress the role of the youth in advancing certain files. Women also extremely important. We are finalizing a guidance note on gender-based hate speech that also includes many of the issues that have been mentioned in this conversation today, especially when it comes to civic space. We know that women are much more targeted than men, women, and also LGBTI and non-binary groups, and are targeted more by hate speech. Also in the context of elections, in the context of limitation of freedom of speech, also, and limitation of FORB. So this is going to be a public document, and I will be very happy to share it with you, Catherine, and if you can share it also with the distinguished participants to this webinar today. Last but not least, I saw a message in the chat box about the role of social media, and this is unfortunately it's a very sad reality right now, that whatever all these trends of hate speech that also intersect with the increasing limitations of freedom of opinion and expression, and also FORB, are magnified by the social media. And because I work a lot with social media in the context of the implementation of the UN strategy and plan of action of hate speech of the Secretary General, I have to say that they're not doing enough. I heard one of the participants raise the issue of the Rohingya. There are a lot of minorities that are discriminated globally in different regions, and the social media are not helping. So I think when it comes to alternative measures to laws and legislations, and alternative measures that are in line with the respect of international human rights standards, I would encourage everybody to work more closely with social media, because their role in amplifying, their role in enhancing the virality of discrimination is is fundamental. Is fundamental. So it cannot be denied, and it cannot be under stress. And they have no interest in helping on these issues, because they are for profit, and they are basing their work on how much comes back to their bank account every year. But people are being killed for this, and I think it's an issue that invites all of us in our different capacity to engage with them stronger, deeper, and to try to also work more on their accountability for what they have been doing in recent years. I think I will stop here. I spoke for 10 minutes, but I can stay for 10 more minutes to further engage with you, and maybe to further explore some of the points that I've raised. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Simona. Really appreciate that, and especially the focus on the gaps. And where we're not just looking at law, it's energizing. There's many more possibilities for us to be creative, and many ways of working on these issues, many of which you've shared as well. So that's exciting. I'm very aware of the time we're meant to close, but we are staying around. I will be staying around as well for another 10-15 minutes or so. I want to make sure if there's something there's a burning question